start recording. And I just want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's ASCILITE live webinar. We're really excited to have you here today for our international panel and for this Weathering the Storm, Higher Education Crisis and Technology Enhanced Learning. Given the recent challenges in higher education, we really wanted to bring together a panel of folks who have actually dealt with similar crises before and to sort of glean from them some of the learnings about what came out of those crises, how they dealt with them, and what the long-term impacts were, what the long-term learnings were from those situations. So with us, we've got Dr. Nicola Dabner from University of Canterbury in New Zealand, Dr. Heng, President of BCM Institute, Managing Director of GMH Continuity Architects in Singapore, and also an author of a book about business continuity in higher education. And lastly, Dr. Susan McCann, who's from the University of Toronto. And I'm going to sort of turn it over to them, and we're going to start right into it. So I'll start with you, Nicola. If you just want to give a little bit more of an introduction and tell us what was the business continuity challenge that you were facing?
So do you want us to introduce ourselves first? Yes?
Yeah, okay, give us a little introduction, what your role was and what the challenge was.
Okay, kia ora koutou ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, ko Nikki Dabner tōku so I'm Nikki Dabner. Nicola was my mother used to call me Nicola when she was mad at me, so I'm commonly known as Nikki. And I'm at the College of Education, Health and Human Development at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand. I've been 30 years working in teacher education, and over 20 of them I've been working in the design and delivery of distance, online and blended learning. So what were our challenges? Well, we had two major earthquakes in Canterbury. First one 2010 in September, and our second one in 2011. And so obviously we, out of the blue, because they never thought we'd have earthquakes in Canterbury, we had to stop delivery, and we had a little gap, and then blow me down, a bigger one came, and then we had a larger gap. I uncannily have found myself being positioned researching at the time and with existing ethics in place during these crises. So I actually conducted research on the university's use of social media and staff responses after the 2010 and 11 earthquake. And I'm currently writing a paper about the mosque shooting that we had in Christchurch a year ago. Some of you may have heard about that. And that is actually talking about the use and impact of digital technologies during the school lockdown event. So I don't know how I end up being in the position, but I am. But I'll be drawing today upon my experiences as a staff member working within the UC community and working with students. How's that?
That's terrific. Thank you, Nikki. Heng.
Hi, I'm actually, either you call me Heng or call me Dr. Go, that's my surname. I'm actually based in Singapore. I spent the last probably about 30 years doing business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management, and the whole works. Basically, I work in corporates, mainly in the financial institution, started Standard Chartered Bank, and my last job was with the sovereign fund in Singapore called GIC. All right, so I think the things that we are, there's no disaster in Singapore, by the way. It's not allowed. And and the major ones are, like I say, is still the pandemic that's happening in 2003, which was really terrible. The rest was and I think the COVID-19 is one of the biggest that we've seen so far. I think in this section probably I'll spend more time talking about this because there are a lot of good learning points from here, but the country was literally crucified for being draconians. I think that's something which I'm very proud of, and I will not apologize for it. The most important thing is that this requires actually at the government level. The control must be taken at government level, and things must happen before it escalates. So example, I just want to give example, two things that's happening. All bars and pubs will be closed today in Singapore because the infection has gone, actually are coming out from the bars and the pubs when people are just drinking. So for folks in Australia, that is something that you will protest and probably have a riot after this. The other one that we have not closed is actually the schools. And that's another one that all the parents are trying to close. But bear in mind, when we close the school, half our population will come back home to look after our kids. And that's something that we're going to fight on for this whole week. So basically, I think the more important thing, our business continuity planning from a business point of view in this part of the world is fairly lacking because most people take it very lightly until such incident happen in Asia especially. So we'll talk a bit more, and basically that's who I am. Over to you, David.
Actually, we're going to turn it over to Susan now.
So hi, I'm Susan McCann. I'm a professor in mechanical and industrial engineering at the University of Toronto. I've been in that position for about 25 years. And about 5 years ago, I took on the role of Vice-Provost Innovations in Undergraduate Education. And about 2 months later, we had a strike. Our teaching assistants went off on strike in the middle of the term for about a month. And educational technology falls partially within my purview. So the technology part falls within our CIO's portfolio, and the pedagogical approaches and the use of technology for distance education and strategy around that falls within my portfolio. So the strike went on for about a month, but at the time we didn't know how long it was going to be going for. And so we were basically overnight moving to a variety of alternative forms of pedagogy that allowed us to continue without necessarily having all of the TA support, teaching assistant support that we normally have. And of course, most recently, we are now, and we've dealt with H1N1, we dealt with SARS, so we have a fair amount of groundwork that had been done. And about a year and a half ago, we put in place a crisis management framework at the university that we employ whenever we have a short-term crisis, something going on campus that is problematic. But for this time around, we started employing that framework in January, and a week and a half ago, we stopped all in-person courses, and over the course of a weekend, moved everything online. We have 90,000 students, 900 programs, and 17 different divisions. So with a total of, we have about 5,000 courses running right now.
Wow.
In some other form of learning. And so some of them took a bit of time to get up and running, and we're still sort of figuring it out. It is figuring our way through sort of day by day at this point, but that is where we are at the moment.
Great, thank you very much for that introduction to the challenges you choose. So I'm going to actually start with Nikki and Susan, and then I'll come to Heng to address the business continuity and other things that we might want to consider. But so Nikki, in the case of the earthquake, and Susan, in the case of SARS and N1H1 and any of the number of examples that you've mentioned, it sounds like you've been around the traps quite a bit with this. What were some of the considerations that you needed to address?
Shall I start? Okay,
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
okay, so when we had the two earthquakes, our first earthquake was in September. So our academic year in New Zealand here goes from sort of February until November. So and that was a 7.1 magnitude earthquake. Now bear in mind we were not expecting earthquakes. So when it happened, I remember jumping up and thinking a plane had come down in my back garden. But in that situation, it was only 40k from the university. So the university shut for 2 weeks. But programs were underway. So we couldn't go back in because obviously every single building needed to be checked to make sure you could reoccupy it. And so we, at that time, it wasn't too long. We thought we used our blended approaches and we adopted things as quickly as we could, and that was fine. It was when we had the next one that things became really problematic. So the February 2011 earthquake was smaller, but it was pretty much bounced underneath Christchurch City. So we had a lot more destruction. There was loss of life. And at that point, it actually happened in the middle of the day. And I was in my office. And I remember when I came out from under the table thinking the water pouring from the ceiling was not good. So I left the building with my laptop and my handbag. And in the next year, I got back into that office twice. So that building it didn't come down. It stayed up. It did its job. So that was tricky, though, because we then shut. And that was the beginning of our academic year. So some of our students had started the year and others hadn't even begun. So we had this 3-week period where the university was shut, where we were trying to work out what on earth are we going to do now. And so we had students that were underway and students that weren't underway. So then thinking about starting an academic year, we had to work out, what's that going to look like when we have lost lots of our classrooms, but we still have some of them. The good news was the IT infrastructure was fine. And so we basically, the challenges that we had there was, what are we going to do about this? So we went through sort of different waves of response. So the first one was we had to react and quickly. And one of the key things we had to do immediately was check that the students were okay. That was the most important thing. That was the communication. And then making sure that we could push out the right information to them about, well, what's actually going to happen. Then that was sort of a recovery period. And then very quickly we had to get back into the redesign, which involved rethinking our teaching strategies. And that is a lot of what you're doing now, David, supporting staff to adopt new practices. We had to do it then. So at that point in time, in the buildings that were open, staff would come in and they would work with other staff to work out how are we going to do this if we haven't got enough buildings for the students to come into. And then the other thing was we had students that had not worked online or flexibly before. So then we had to work out, if we're bringing the students into this different sort of delivery mode, how can we support them to do it, but actually do it from a distance? And the interesting thing was we had some students that had started the year and they were distance, and of course they didn't live in Canterbury, so they were all gung-ho, let's get going. So we had this dilemma where you couldn't start an academic year for some that others couldn't do. So it was that, what do we do for those that are just saying, well, look, I'm away, I'm good to go, and then others that, their house had pretty much fallen apart. Now, in this time, by the way, we had over 10,000 aftershocks. So I remember sitting at my kitchen table permanently with the door open, and if it was a bad one, I'd look at the dog, and if the dog took off outside, so did I. So it was sort of like there were things happening at the time. We were always thinking, will there be another one? So that was in the redesign. But ironically, by March, which is not bad considering it was February, we were actually able to restart. Now, we had the issue of not having enough buildings. So we had marquees, the big wedding marquees. We had those around the campus and lots of portaloos. We had the buildings that had been, we have a really good engineering school that had been, checked through thoroughly, and they were okay. And eventually we ended up with prefabs that were brought onto the campus, and they're only just moving off now. Now you might think, crikey, that's 2011, but the after effects of this in terms of the impact upon our teaching has been, and there are still people in Christchurch who are waiting to get their houses fully fixed, so we've never really come out of the back of it. So I think in those key things, and I mean, obviously we've learned a lot in terms of being flexible and being responsive, but the key thing for me in all of this was, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is the need for really good communication. And I see a difference between communication and information. And I think in working with the students through that time, that was the most important thing. And we were lucky that we had a good LMS that we were using. A lot of the staff were already using Adobe Connect to sort of deliver. And then what I discovered with my research is it was actually the students themselves and the media that they were using on their phones, the use of social media, that actually became a really important strategy for communication, because they were looking to us to say it's all going to be okay. And I think that's exactly what our students are doing right now as well. How's that?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Nikki. No, that's true. That is terrific. And I think I would, before we're done, like to circle back to how that question of how do we let our students know that things are going to be okay. So I want to come back to that at the end. But Susan, can you talk a little bit about University of Toronto and some of the considerations that you've kept in mind?
Certainly, I think Nikki mentioned communication. I think that is absolutely key, and it's been one of the. It was one of our major learnings out of our TA strike was the importance of clear communication, both to our faculty, our staff, and our students. And something else she mentioned was the fact that in this particular crisis, because I don't think we've had a crisis quite like this one that we're in the middle of right now before. Even H1N1 and SARS were not like this. We are dealing with faculty going through their own stuff. And students at the same time that we're also trying to maintain academic continuity. And that is really challenging. We shut down in-person classes the same day that all of the public schools in Toronto stopped operating. And so our faculty and staff were dealing with the combination of all of their courses going to some remote delivery mode at the same time as all of their kids were no longer in school, literally within hours of happening. So that has been, I think, one of the major challenges is helping our faculty figure out ways in which that they can juggle I think, the real fear and the real sense of worry with store shelves being empty and things like this, kids being home, while at the same time continuing our academic mission. And our IT staff have been absolutely fantastic and pivotal in making sure that our faculty feel really well supported through this period. I'm trying to think of other things that I think in terms of communication we worked very hard during the strike to start to set up ways of communicating that were routine, because in a crisis where things are not routine and where things are very unpredictable, having some systems in place or some things happening that are routine and predictable is really important. And I can talk a bit more about what my team has been doing to build some predictability and some sense of routine for our academic leaders as they work their way through this, as a way of trying to bring some normalcy to the situation. But I'll stop there for now. And
okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks for that. So, Dr. Go, do you have anything to add on maybe some considerations that folks would want to take into account in these sorts of situations?
Probably what I'll probably just set the stage on what's happening in this in Singapore. We had SARS in 2003. I think Hong Kong Singapore and Toronto has one of the worst hit. And one of the things that the government has set forth since 2003 was to prepare for the next pandemic. You'll be surprised, and everybody's just laughing at them. And that it has been 17 years since. So the stage is that the government has been spending a lot of time. In fact, every industry in Singapore has its own pandemic exercise. Coming back to the education institution, the last 3 years, from a education technology point of view, all the courses has been now on video. I mean, on e-learning and video, which I have lots of friends in the education institution was really complaining. Like, I think they are benefiting from it now because all the courses has been cancelled, and everybody is still running their courses from home. The other interesting part was that the semester was opening, in fact, the last couple of weeks ago, and they're getting new students coming into the university itself. And guess what they did was they still did an open house, but it's a full virtual open house. Means actually new students can actually go around the whole campus virtually. That's very interesting, and I find it very innovative, because the students will not go on the ground, but they will actually be able to see which faculty they are in, which room they are going to study, and so on and so forth. So that's something that I think it is a very long-term effort that everybody has put in place. I think the other thing to take note is that we have, from a communication point of view, something that has gone very well was that when we first started, the communication was done by multiple agencies. I think everybody does it, and now from in Singapore itself, there's only one agency that's only sending out messages, because we are getting a lot of fake news, and or rather rumors, I call them, and we are having a lot of problem handling them. And the government has come in with two approach. One is that we have a new legislation called POPMA, which actually we can ask Facebook to take out anything that is deemed not true. And the second item was that we have the Ministry of Health sending. In fact, I just got one message just to tell you that as at now, this morning we had 32 new cases. 30 came from people coming back from Europe, North America, and Australia, Middle East, ASEAN, and 4 are linked to previous case, 13 are unlinked, which means we have to do contact tracing. All right, so I think the fact that there's a central means of communication is very important. And similar to university, I guess someone must have a central means of communicating, WhatsApp or some notification tools from business continuity point of view. The key message is this: there must be a trusted system prior to the occurrence of the disruption itself. Let's say in this case, COVID-19. And we all have a communication tool on our hand, which is our mobile. And the most important thing is we have to standardize in terms of our platform. Like example, in this part of the world, we are very heavy on WhatsApp, and basically everybody has a WhatsApp on our hand. So if you are in the Philippines, then you have to be on Viber, and so on and so forth. So we need to know what are the tools that's used by everybody, including the common people. When I say common people, means even the parents and the grandparents are using WhatsApp in this part of the world. So I think communication is key, but more importantly, it must be centralized. And currently, we have managed to actually control all messaging through communication. From a educational point of view, we have a few contentious issues now in Singapore, which is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a big petition going on to close all our schools now. It happens in Japan. The Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister, closed the school immediately, and half of the population went home. So actually, the disruption to the economy is a very different impact. Has a very different impact. Reason is because all the parents have to come back home and just to look after their children. So this is one consideration. We are having a problem now, and I expect them to close it very soon, because the petition is getting very high in terms of numbers. but the government is trying to keep it up. And the other things about school now is that just at last night, all childcare and all nursery and all tuition centers are closed. Reason is because the proximity between each students are too close. So the current situation now is that emphasis in this part in Singapore is social distancing. I think from this point of view, social distancing is the way to go. And there's something very interesting about this whole outbreak. When Wuhan happens, the first few countries that happened was actually Singapore. And what I'm seeing now is that most countries, even New Zealand, even the America, is about 3 to 4 weeks behind us. So there's a lot of learning that you can learn from. You should start to learn from Asia. What are your folks doing from in Asia itself? Your colleagues in around Asia. Like example, lockdown. Lockdown is nothing new. But the problem we have now is that lockdown has a very different definition in every country. I have a full team in Malaysia. My whole office is locked down, and they just do not know how to operate. All right, so these are some of the challenges you're going to face because it's going to lock down. And I think Nicholas, I think one of your concern is the country going up to level 4. I think it's probably today or tomorrow, and that is a lockdown. And lockdown means what to a lot of people. And in Malaysia, because of the lockdown, nobody cares. What happened is after 1 week, everybody's still running around shopping, and guess what happened? The Prime Minister just announced yesterday that they're going to extend the lockdown by 2 more weeks. So what I'm trying to emphasize to everybody and audience is that whether in the education institution or society in general, pay more attention to countries that has gone to the first wave. In fact, we're waiting for the second wave, which is probably about 4 to 10 times more than what we have encountered about 4 to 8 weeks ago. So lesson learned is I think there's a lot of catch up to be done, but the advantage, if I may use the word wrongly, is that there's a lot of learning from the countries that has been hit, and the total chaos in terms of society in general, discipline, and so on and so forth, is a major issue to this outbreak. All right, so I'll stop here for a while, and then we'll hand it over to Susan.
So I think that actually starts to, so we've talked about communication, we've talked about messaging to students, taking care of students, we've talked about, I guess addressing sort of what lockdown or what what restrictions might mean, for both academics and students, and addressing that with them. So kind of getting over now into the strategies area, in those situations such as the earthquake or SARS or H1N1 and the other crises that we're talking about, were there strategies or approaches that were introduced, particularly with regard to educational technology, that you found that worked well, or strategies, either along those lines of those things with communication and student and servicing students?
Sure, I could start if that's okay.
Please.
Yeah, so there's a couple of strategies that we've been using over the past couple of weeks that seem to be working. So I'll mention 3 of them. The first one is that for every critical person, and usually it's we are a very decentralized, very distributed system at the University of Toronto. We're distributed across 3 campuses, and we rely on our educational technologists are distributed across multiple campuses. But for every key area, you probably have somebody's email address that is the person that you would go to for help for something. We have been trying to make sure that those email addresses are not individuals, but they are in fact email addresses that are staffed by a group of people. And that has been critical because you can very quickly burn through people when they are the go-to person for something. So if you can make it an email address that can be staffed by people and can take shifts on it, you don't burn through your key experts as fast, because they're not only trying to monitor their own email, they're monitoring this additional flood that's coming through about a particular, given that the crisis is now on top of that. And so that's one key thing. The second key thing we did was my office set up what is essentially a newscast every morning. And so I get on a teleconference. It's about 80 to 100 people on the teleconference with me. And I deliver every morning about 15 minutes worth of what is the news of the day, what are things that people need to know today. And then we open it up for questions on the line for key questions that are coming through. And that includes that 80 to 100 people is all of our vice deans, our people who are dealing with placements, internships, and practicums. It includes registrars across the institution, basically people who are essential leaders in academic continuity. And then every afternoon, every evening, my staff puts together a briefing note that goes out to that same group of people that reiterates what we talked about in the morning and adds anything new that has come in during the day. And then we repeat that cycle next day. And what we're being told is that kind of communication is really essential for anchoring everybody and making sure that they've got everybody on the same page around things like when can you change the assessments in a course, or what happens if I can't run an experiential learning component of the class? How do we work around that? And I think the third thing is for our educational technology staff. We had a network already built of people who work in educational technology. I think many schools already have that sort of network built in. Our staff quickly moved to helping people online and using the same technologies that we want people to be using in their teaching. And so getting faculty to log into Blackboard Collaborate or Zoom or other kinds of technologies onto Teams to get help helped them become familiar with the kinds of technology that they are now using. And we set up on the first weekend that we were down, we set up online help sessions with a dozen or so of our educational technologists that were running from 9 o'clock in the morning till midnight, staffed with a number of people continuously to help faculty move online. So I think those were the kinds of strategies we were using to get our faculty up to speed.
Excellent.
Great.
Shall I build upon that, David? Shall I keep going?
Going.
I love the idea of your emailing list. I think that's a superb idea. I'm trying to work out what I've got that's a little bit different. And we've been preparing, even though we were prepared, obviously it's a whole university, we've been focusing on the preparedness for probably a week and a half now. Our university now is shut, by the way. That was shut on Tuesday. We've moved our break forward. And so students are now on their first break for the year for 4 weeks. That's giving staff a little bit of time, actually, by changing the timetable, giving them a little bit more time to prepare ahead. And we're preparing for the whole of the semester, so to the middle of the year. And New Zealand goes into level 4 tonight, which means everything stops sort of everywhere. I'd like to bring up the Zoom. So I think what you said, Susan, about getting the staff to use some of the tools that they can use for their teaching, and I'd like to use that from a student perspective too. So what we've been doing, we've had our campus and distance students within my qualification. I work in mainly using Zoom for learning Te Reo Māori, actually, so they get together in a group. And what we've asked them to do is to keep contact with that group. So even though the university is shut, because that's a way of the social connectedness, because I'm absolutely adamant that as the physical distancing is actually increasing, we need to increase the social connectedness. And so it's actually finding ways to help students to support other students as well. And if you think about the number, if I think about the number that Susan has got is staggering in terms of her student community, and ours is big enough, but we're actually then using asking our students to use the tools that they've been using for their learning from a support perspective to support each other. I agree totally about the communication, and I think that's one thing from the earthquakes we found. The communication has got to be clear, it's got to be timely, and it's got to be predictable. If they know that at 1 o'clock an update will be presented, I think everybody knows to look for it, and I think that is really important. This year we've introduced a new UC app right at the beginning of the year, UC Go, and there is a version for staff and a version for students, and that has an automatic direct link to all of the updated material on our website and things like they can view their timetables and everything. So I think, you know, we've got some really good technology around now that can actually help. But I'm getting back to that notion of the importance of community and communication, and that the students know where to find the truth. I think that is really, really important. They're very anxious, and so it can be in a Facebook group that they're talking to each other and someone's spinning off. And I had that this morning with a call from a student, and so we have to be really clear that we can keep them calm, let them know where to find the information, but then use these amazing tools that we've got available with us now to actually connect with each other. And the reason I love Zoom is it's a free app, you can see people. So it's, I think threaded discussions have got, you know, they've got a place in higher education, but it's actually the ability to connect to the person. And so that's probably my little bit to add to that one. How's that, David?
It's excellent. Dr. Go, anything to add on top of that?
Okay, since we're on the topic of communication, I think there are a few things that I mean, it's hindsight now. One of the things that most organizations are using is a form of notification tool. And it allows you to segment the types of people to notify, whether you want to talk to your IT folks or you talk to your staff or your particular division departments and so on and so forth. So there are notification tools available. The only challenge is that it has to be updated on regular basis, and from UC point of view, students comes and go. It is almost impossible. So there's two types. One is for permanent staff, staff, whereby you will actually use them to communicate with internal, and then you will probably ask faculties to develop their own tools. Whether you use, in our case, I always use the word WhatsApp, or you can use your SMS, but WhatsApp seems to be the best because they will form their own cluster, and the clusters are more effective than notification tools, surprisingly. So from a communication point of view, I think that the technology is there. The only thing is that it has to be set up prior to the whole outbreak itself. Now, the second thing is on the messaging. I think both panelists has actually emphasized this correctly. One of the challenge we are finding is that all our students and everybody, the younger generation in any part of the world, gets its information from non-mainstream. I call them alternative means, and that's the worst because there is no offense, there's no responsibility to report what is correct, or rather to double check. That's one of the challenges we are facing, and that becomes, I would classify them as fake news. So there must be a central source, and what Susan has done is incredible. What you're doing is called crisis management, by the way, and what you've done is, from a crisis management point of view, excuse me, they're fumigating for mosquito now because we have also a dengue outbreak in Singapore. Okay, so basically, we have I think back to the crisis management. Every morning, every organization now in this part of the world will huddle. I call it huddle. It could be 15 minutes, it could be half an hour. like what Susan has mentioned, there's a requirement to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if you can share the information, like example, what is factual and what's not, especially on casualties. Example, who has been infected, who has not been infected, or example, who's been hospitalized, or the worst case scenario, who has passed on. Those are very important information because I had lunch with this person yesterday, and he has been hospitalized. So these are all the things that we need to establish now, and then this should be a common playbook for everybody who's operating under such circumstances. The last one is technology. I think technology, if you have it now, good. If you don't have it now, there's nothing you and I can do. But for a technology point of view, I think full deployment of technology, like what you guys are doing, education technology, is the same. And last but not least, I think as one of the tools, like what we're doing, WebEx, or even I use Zoom all the time, by the way. And basically, that's the best because I can see 100 faces in front of me. So basically, what I'm trying to emphasize is that if we talk about communication, the most important thing is you have to establish the network, formal and informal, and then basically message must be out in the morning, and you take stock in the night. Take stock in the night means we just have to reconfirm or be prepared for what's ready for briefing tomorrow, and you have to tie in with all the government messaging. I think that's something which is very hard to coordinate because the government has its own messaging, and they like to do a press conference in Singapore. We like to do it at 8 o'clock in the night, where everybody's not working. So when you have that kind of messaging, which means 9 o'clock to this morning, we have to implement all these things. So this is the challenge we are finding for the implementation of some of the steps that we need to implement, because the government wants the market to close first before they start to make the announcement. All right, so this is something that I think messaging is very important, and it has to be regularly. And the bad news is this: this is going to last us for another at least 6 more months anyway. So I think this is going to be a routine. And last message to highlight is this: we are suffering from what we call pandemic fatigue, and that's something all of you have to take note. It is getting tiring. So there must be a managed from a mental health point of view, and also from a fatigue. So the whole thing, someone has to think about the pacing now. Example, you may not want to have the whole team down, or rather half the team, and then start to pace yourself because it's a very long run for this exercise. I think that's all for me now. David, over to you.
No, thank you for that, Dr. Go. And I think you really hit a good point there at the end, about, it is going to be a long race, and we really do need to pace ourselves. And I think that's some really good advice, because I know, we're only, where we're sitting, we're only 2.5 weeks into this, and I think already some folks are feeling a bit weary, and we haven't even really started, because our students, at least at our institution, our students aren't back till the 6th of April. So I think we're going to skip over the other question that we planned, was it the results or the learnings of the process, because I think we've been hitting on those all along the way. But of the pre-planned things that we discussed, and I think this is going to be more for you, Nikki and Susan, referring to those previous situations. But in terms of the actions on the part of the institution following the specific crisis, was, what can you talk about what changed, or what what things were put in place at the institution following those previous crises?
Okay, shall I start?
Go.
our biggest learning was be prepared for the unexpected, and that again has actually, we've developed, I believe, quite a high level of resilience through what we have had to go through there, and that is serving us well now. But that notion of being prepared for the unexpected. But in terms of the real value out of it, I think for some staff they realised the value of adopting a blended approach, and that moved us forward. So prior to the earthquakes, there were some staff that were totally convinced that if you weren't there, they weren't there with you, learning really wouldn't happen, or the quality would not be good. So I believe our university has increased its commitment since that time to now to ensure that we have the technological tools. I think that staff have become interested in different pedagogies, and staff moved away from thinking, this is what I want to do, how can I do it online too? Can I do different things online? So I think that was a real positive thing. A really key thing from that was the communication, and I think everybody's alluded to that, the importance of information and the importance of communication. And I think in terms of reviewing what we learned from the experiences with the first and then the second earthquake, and part of it was what you talked about, sustainability. So I think the practices that we have now, we had some amazing people that just about killed themselves keeping communication channels open, and I think we learned a lot from that, and that is serving us well now. I think from our perspective too, I don't know if you've heard about the student army that happened in Canterbury. After the first earthquake, the students got together and decided they would like to help the community, and in some way, and it was liquefaction and and after we had the second one, that became enormous. And what amazed me, because I did some research about what they were doing as well, is they really want to be able to help. And I think at the moment, some of our young people are getting a bit slighted in terms of, they're going out and partying. Well, in my experience from what we had, they wanted to help their community. They were amazing problem solvers, and they found creative ways and apps and ways to communicate to actually mobilize themselves in an incredible way. And so I think we took some learning from them too. Look what they were able to do. But in terms of the university, clear, regular communication and information, I think that's what we've taken forward from there. And then also the notion of how important the pastoral care is. And I know it's hard when there are thousands of them and there's a few of us, but we need to ensure we've got systems to make sure that these people are okay. And I'd forgot to mention in the last lot, one thing that I think we learned a lot about is the value of data analytics. And I know most LMS have an inbuilt system. We had a new system developed, and we're actually trialing another system now, but using the data analytics within an LMS, not for student support. I'm able to see very quickly who's falling off and identify them, because when you have a lot, you need to identify who it is that you need to follow up with. So that would be my contribution, I think. But yeah, we've moved into all sorts of blended learning approaches, and I think it's moved us all on. How's that?
Great. Susan, anything to add there?
Sure, just a couple of things. So one is after SARS or H1N1, we changed our academic continuity policy that built in sort of more adaptability for courses that were undergoing change in the midst of a term. And so our academic continuity processes and policies now allow for things like ways for changing assessment during the term with a vote from the class and things like that we didn't have before, and which allow us to have more resiliency. And on that note, we have we have an academic continuity group that meets every year and goes over what the policy says and how it works, and we have a number of sort of sign-offs from various groups to make sure that it stays in place. And one of those is our IT group, which needs to certify every year that we have in place the IT systems, backups, and so on that we need in case of a crisis. And so that is part of our academic continuity plan and course resiliency, and it's part of our crisis framework. We didn't have a huge number of online courses when we started this year. We, out of 5,000 or so, 10,000 or so courses that we teach every year, there's only about 100 that are fully online. But we have a fairly active online strategy office, and we've been doing a fair amount with MOOCs and other exploring other areas of online learning, particularly with faculty who are interested in this as a way of expanding their exploration of pedagogical approaches. And so that office has become very critical in this current situation.
Terrific. So I want to thank you for all of that. I'm just conscious of the time, and I want to make sure that we have a little bit of an opportunity to open it up for questions. So the first one is one that came through the chat, and Susan, you've actually already touched on this, but Scott has asked, what, in terms of your academic processes and changes to assessments, like what did you change you mentioned that thing with the class and the class agreement. Were there other changes to your assessment approval policies, processes?
Sure. So at the University of Toronto, like I think at most universities, the syllabus forms an agreement between the university and the students, and we have to adhere to the marking scheme that is set out on the syllabus, and that is sort of sacred. But our academic continuity policy allows that for, in the case of situations where it's really clear that we can't deliver what was going to be the types of assessment that we had described on the syllabus, allows the class to vote. So if the instructor puts forward an alternative assessment plan and the students vote to accept that alternative assessment plan, the class can move forward without any other approval process. As long as the plan is one that the division accepts as reasonable. So that allows us to continue many courses without a huge amount of kerfuffle. It basically allows us to move forward. Where we cannot hold a vote, or because we're close to the end of the term, for example, and we're about a week and a half away from the end of the term at this point, or where the change to the course is to something that is a governed part of the course, not an instructor selected part of the delivery, we have to declare a disruption. And we are beginning to declare disruptions in a small number of courses, which allows us to make more significant changes to courses. But so far, the number of disruptions that we've had to declare has been relatively few. We've been able to use our continuity policy to make the changes in most courses that we need to make to allow them to continue.
That we've had a couple of posts in the forum related to something that actually Nikki, you talked about, which was about that pastoral care. And so Nigel, she has said that a presenter on ABC made the case to talk about spatial distancing versus social distancing, and this was in that response about the comment about how we need to be more socially connected. The other question, and it was a note we also made about talking about that pastoral care and making students feel okay, but Kristen has also added, how do we make staff feel okay? So approaches, recommendations?
I'll just say, while I've been sitting here, I've been having my emails popped up, and there's been the funniest little from the staff in our qualification actually talking about being at home with their children. And they say that humour is the last bastion. Just as I'm talking about asking my students to look after each other by checking in, we're doing that same thing, because I think, yes, as staff, we have, you have access to all sorts of counselling and things, and we have wellness, but this is completely different. This situation now is something we have not had to deal with. It's going to be for a long time, and again, I think that's why I keep emphasising it. It kept disturbing me every time I read in the news about this notion of the distancing, social distancing, and I kept wanting to jump up and down. In fact, I posted on my Twitter feed, it's not that at all. It's about physical distancing but social connectiveness, and I think that is the key to our well-being, is our social connectiveness. Where when you're having a Zoom meeting, I think it's important, you can see people. I think the connectedness of being able to see a face is actually really, really important. And so, I would like to think our staff are all checking on each other to make sure we're okay, because part of this contingency planning will be, we've got staff at the moment that are not in a position to be able to do all their work. They've now got 4 children as of yesterday, and they've got other responsibilities, and their parental responsibilities, and let's face it, they are important responsibilities. So I think if we come together, we will support each other through it by using the very same things that our students will be just going to be more important. I'm having a coffee tomorrow. I've put an open invite to all of our whole cohort to have coffee with Nikki, and it's going. I will not talk. I've said I will not talk about any course content. I will not talk about assessments or assignments. It's about coming in and being together.
Very good. Yes, we're talking about doing some online community, particularly because we're in a role where we're supporting academics who are mostly face-to-face teachers historically. So we're trying actually to have some drop-in community of practice type stuff. So we had another question.
David, before you go on, I just wanted to say one of the things we've done is set up a staff calendar, at least for my group of staff, that allows them to check out during the day, and so they can put into the calendar that they're going out running, or that they're going out, that they're taking time out for childcare, and I have worked it out for my staff to have a calendar that shows me when they're out, so I won't be emailing them or bugging them for things during the day when they've checked out for that hour or two of home care or self-care.
That's a really good idea. I want to use that. And I see, Susan, you've actually already sort of responded to this, but Scott's asked the question about what about students with limited connectivity or no internet access?
Yeah, so that's my problem du jour. Is we, as of today, due to the province declaring a state of emergency at this point, and all non-essential businesses being closed, we've had to close the last of our libraries. We had some libraries open where students could go in and use the computers, and we've just had to close those as of 6 o'clock this afternoon. So we are now scrambling to find laptops. So some of our outreach programs that we're going to be running shortly have laptops, and we are trying to find those and trying to get students set up with internet service on loan, because we have a significant population of students that don't have access to technology as well. We have quite a lot of low-income students at the university, so I could tell you a week from now what our solution to that is.
Nigel's also asked, what are your thoughts about output-based WFH versus time? Oh, sorry. Output-based work from home versus time-based work from home?
Yeah, so I basically, as long as my staff are able to get done what we need them to get done, we're fine with it. And in fact, under our crisis framework, we are able to change the roles of staff. And so one of my big learnings from this has been add staff that before you think you need them. So we started adding people into my team quickly, and for the first hour or so, they were sitting there just sort of watching what was going on, and then about 5 seconds later, they were full up. so add people before you think you need them. And we have moved people around in the university virtually, because they're of course all working remotely at this point, to where they're needed. I just redeployed one of my staff members into another area where she's going to help plan out our next term courses, while the rest of my group are currently working on the situation at hand. And so moving people to where they're needed quickly, and having a structure for doing that is really essential.
Thank you for that. We are now at time, so I'm just going to go back to the panel for 1 second and ask them for any parting remarks.
I'll go first. There's a really great whakatauki in Tau Māori. E waka e ke noa. We're all in the same boat together. And isn't it weird that our borders are closing, and I believe that our work together as a world is increasing. I think we've all got this common, I suppose, enemy that we're working to, and so it gets back to that, distance versus connectedness. I'd like to thank you for inviting me today to share some of my past experiences. And kia kaha, everybody. Be strong and keep safe and stay inside.
Thanks for that, Nikki. Anyone else?
Sure. So I think Nikki said it really well, is that we are all in this together, and any kind of sharing we can do about what works and how it works is really important. I hope that as people are going through this, they're keeping lessons learned documents and adding to them, because I think that there will be a great deal of learning that will come out of this around how to use technology in teaching and how to use it to bring people together at a time when we need to be apart. And so I really appreciate being invited to share some thoughts today.
Okay, I guess I'm the last one. Thanks for the invitation again. The final parting shot is, like what I mentioned, it's going to be a very long exercise. We're going to encounter wave after wave, and we are experiencing very different reaction by different governments around the world. And closing of borders is something that we have never envisaged or never imagined. I guess the more important thing is like what both panelists has mentioned, Susan and Nikki. I think one of the things is it's not about documenting. I wouldn't want documenting what are the learnings. I think the idea is somehow or other the dissemination of some of these learnings immediately is very important. That's how I see it. The most important thing is whatever each country is learning is going to happen to the next few countries. I think that's something that I mean, we have the some of countries have the time advantage, and what I probably would encourage everybody is to learn from your counterparts around the world, those that are way ahead in terms of infection, and that will help a lot because it buys you 1 to 2 weeks of time, and that would be probably my parting shot. Over to you, David.
So thank you very much to our panel, and thank you to all of you who joined us for today's webinar on behalf of ASCILITE. We very much appreciate it. We think it's a really important time for us to come together as a community. And if you are part of the ASCILITE or you've joined this session and you have interest in this, we are running yet another special session next week with the leaders from our special interest groups, who will be talking about the different roles and things that folks like the TEL advisors, learning analytics, business educators, and the different groups can play in supporting institutions as we sort of venture into this brave new world in crisis. So please watch the ASCILITE website for the date and time of that. And until then, we will see you soon.
Thanks, David.